All right, everyone, welcome in to Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports, the second episode here on October 27th, 2021. Thank you to everyone who watched or listened to our first episode last week, and I certainly hope you enjoyed that, but we're going to keep this train rolling right along. My name is Nicholas Hill. I'm here in Chattanooga, Tennessee of the United States of America, and in case you didn't catch our initial episode, the concept of this show is we're going to talk American sports and Brazilian sports, kind of mesh the two. And at the end of the day, sports are sports, and we learn there's a lot more in common than there are differences. And of course, my other half here on this podcast is Gustavo Tomazeli down in Sao Paulo, Americana, Brazil. And it's going to be a very, very fun show tonight. We have got a lot of different topics planned. We're going to talk about some sports corruption. We're going to recap. We're talking about the World Series that's going on right now with my Atlanta Braves playing down in Houston. We're going to talk about Formula One coming to the United States and whether or not it could seriously contend with NASCAR. And Gus is going to give us some updates on what's going on with Brazilian soccer. But Gus, down there in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in the town Americana, how are you doing, my friend?
Now you got it right. Now you got it right. Now you got it right. You kind of the way you introduced me, it was like if you say I'm in Tennessee, Chattanooga, United States. But jokes aside, nice to be with you, Nick, again in our second episode of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. Here's kind of like a little uneventful night. It's only Brazilian Cup semifinals. No teams from the state of Sao Paulo, so it's weird to watch the Rios team playing. But and I like the initial topic. And let's dive in because the topic that it's a lot in Brazil. It's very into our sports culture. But I'll let you introduce our opening topic.
Yeah, then the topic that we want to discuss tonight for our opening topic is sports corruption. And I think the reason why I wanted to discuss this is the situation going on right now with the NFL. So if you haven't been following what's been going on in the NFL, it kind of goes back for the past few weeks. There's been a series of emails leaked from the Washington football team regarding some of the inappropriate workplace culture that was going on. There were sexist, racist, misogynistic emails, just a really toxic work culture. And of course, most famously, John Gruden, former head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, got caught up in all of that. And of course, he had to resign because he was going to get fired, just because it wasn't going to work out in the long run. However, there's a whole lot of other emails out there that the NFL has decided they are not going to show the public. And it's just everyone is left questioning what exactly is in those emails that the NFL is trying to hide. And is this another example of sports corruption? And I'll toss to you guys because I really do think that the NFL really is trying to hide something here that they don't want us to see. Whatever that might be, whether it's something really derogatory, maybe the Goodell himself said something that he doesn't want the public to see. It just seems really ironic that the New York Times was able to get John Gruden's emails, but why haven't we able to see everyone else's? If his were able to be made available public, I think everyone's should be able to be made public.
No, I definitely agree, Nick. And it's very selective kind of, email releasing was kind of like, it was coordinated or not. And, in Brazil, we're very familiar with the term, what wanted to be leaked is going to be leaked. It's like, if something is, is directed to some organization or someone, it's going, it looks sketchy. And in Brazil right now, the kind of like the comparison in terms of, the toxic environment and the fallout, I can compare with the Washington football team, is what happening to the Brazilian Soccer Federation, the CBF, which is kind of like the U.S. Soccer Federation, like the maximum entity that oversees soccer in Brazil. And the president, Rogério Caboclo, which he was not beloved to the soccer, to the most important soccer clubs in Brazil, but he was very political. He was appointee from like a former president who was he was in jail now right now in New York City with corruption charges related to the FIFA case. I think you remember that the Justice Department brought down. But in the case of the Rogério Caboclo, he was kind of he's on a leave because he was also caught up in a scandal with a secretary. He was basically have sexual harassment, workplace harassment, calling her a dog, offering her like dog treats, and saying that she was his B word and all that. So corruption and being the toxic environment, and what wanted to be released. And I compared the situation here to the situation in America. It's like, why why the story was leaked? What purpose was it? It was because they want Rogério Caboclo out. They want to change the command. What this information should be useful for? And I imagine that's the same question you ask, why the NFL only released certain emails and not others.
Yeah, and also might just be a cultural thing too, because obviously over the past 5 years, Me Too has been a massive deal in terms of how we look at these harassment claims, how we look at the way employers are treated within the workplace. And I'm just kind of curious from the Brazilian point of view, did they also go through a lot of the Me Too stuff, or have they been separated from that, or have they had something else entirely?
Yeah. Of course, the movement of this kind of harassment. Yes, and this case was a big one in terms of this kind of movement of going forward. That secretary that went forward, she publicly came out and told about all the horrible things Rogério Caboclo allegedly did. So he's still under investigation. So it's allegedly he did those things, but it's kind of like corruption in sports in Brazil is more related to kickbacks and bribes, and and we can talk about this later. And I was even talking to you about that before we started the show, that one of the biggest scandals in Brazilian soccer that everybody knows, but nobody puts the thumb in the injury, in the, like, we have or like go deep into this. It's like soccer agents, agents that are related to, like, soccer players that have connections with soccer teams, and then they kind of appoint those players to play in front of, like, putting monetary interest above, like, the ability to play. I imagine America won't have that much, but still, though, it's still corruption. And that's kind of like the point of view that I have from here. It's kind of like the scandal of John Gruden's like a kind of like a more like moral corruption, more like a, how can I say, it's more like more, it's just Me Too corruption than like a monetary corruption. I think I mean, imagine the emails that would be hiding. Maybe they're hiding that.
Right, and it could be both. I mean, there's a lot of times where financial corruption also is equivalent to moral corruption. But delineating when financial corruption turns into moral corruption is, all the same in own. Like, as let's think about in college football, is it really immoral to give a college football player, $180,000 to come to your school, like in the case of what was alleged with Cam Newton at Auburn? Is it really immoral to give him that much money? It's immoral maybe in the sense that no one else is getting that money on the team, but at the same time, for someone who didn't come from the richest household, from the richest background, someone like a Reggie Bush at USC, who came from a poor household, and when he got to USC and his talents really were able to drive up his market value. And obviously the NIL rules that have come out this year have really given college athletes a path forward in terms of
Of kind
being
of
able to make money.
of
Go ahead.
formalizing, or like, finally coming out of the shadows of, and Reggie Bush really must feel vindicated, because he was the impersonation of corruption in college athletics, but he was just getting rewarded financially for his talent.
Yeah, first hot take of the day: they should give him his Heisman Trophy back. It's ridiculous that
Yes.
he lost his when there's other Heisman Trophy winners in the past have done allegedly a lot worse, and they got to keep their Heisman Trophy winners, aka OJ Simpson. But regardless of that, just kind of bringing it full circle.
And,
You know,
to a
whenever
point,
you have a contentious issue like what's going on with Washington and John Gruden, there's obviously the NFL. they're a massive enough corporation. They can take these PR hits and still be the biggest sport in America. I mean, think about all the players over the past few years that have gotten themselves into just really bad situations. Ray Rice, Kareem Hunt, you know, um, just the list continues to go on, like on and on, of several players, like Antonio Brown too. Think about what all the stuff he got alleged of doing back at Central Michigan. Yeah, he's found himself back on a team. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the NFL is the ultimate talents exceed your problems. John Gruden, I don't think was doing well enough for his talents to exceed his problems. But when it obviously the NFL, you just have to wonder: is there a moral scandal so bad that the NFL can't withstand it? And kind of, I'm thinking about like the Deshaun Watson situation right now. Because obviously there's this whole potential of him being traded to Miami from Houston, despite the nearly 24 sexual harassment charges that are hanging over his head right now from various massage therapists. And
And another point that it's interesting to bring it on. It's kind of like what extent does athletes deserve a better second chance when they had a discretion, with the law? Deshaun Watson with the allegedly sexual harassment and all the stuff that he did, he is going to get a second chance. But right now he's not playing, not because of that. It's because he has a holdout with the Houston Texans. But the point is, like, in Brazil, the biggest case was the goalkeeper Bruno, that in 2010 he allegedly killed his mistress, and he went to court and got arrested. But then he got like under probation and left jail. Several soccer teams wanted to hire him because of all the publicity. But then the peaceful question, like, does he deserve a second chance? Does he deserve to play soccer again after what he did? And I know that was a really big case, but in term, and even it's still in the
I don't
corruption.
see how that's good publicity. I mean, why would you want to bring an alleged someone who allegedly attempted to murder someone onto your team? I mean, it's not like
Yeah,
the Jacksonville Jaguars bringing on Tim Tebow, who, yeah, he may annoy some people, but a lot of other people adore him for who
but he
he
did
is.
nothing wrong under the law. He did any misdemeanor or felony or anything. Like, in Deshaun Watson, he has, if he got, if he's guilty of, he got after an investigation, like, that's the risk of Miami's having. But and that's the thing, like, under this kind of like the umbrella of sports corruption and sports aggression, like, what is the extent that people forgive and forget when actions that is not on the field, that is off the field, affects on the field?
Right. It really depends on what you did off the field. Like, if you, I don't know, if it's like a minor crime, and I guess in every crime it is major, but there are tiers. Like, if you murder someone, it's really hard to forget someone who did that. Like someone like Aaron Hernandez, like his career was done when he
Yeah,
murdered those
yeah,
two
that's
guys.
that's a
Like,
good,
he
that's a
was
good
never coming
example.
back from that. Like OJ Simpson, still to this day, I think his reputation's ruined because even though he technically was found not guilty of killing Nicole and Ron, a lot of people still think he did, and in public opinion, can't be changed once after it's set. It's not like a legal proceeding, even though technically the NFL could have anything to do with him, they just choose not to. So it, it just really it's all about public opinion, because you can, with good PR, you can spin anything positive. Well, not spin anything positive, but you can spin a lot of things positively. But there's some things you just can't.
No, yeah, definitely. And and instead of in speaking of, kind of, you know, public perception and stuff off the field. And going back to what you said about athletes that come from humble backgrounds and kind of like a more like a middle income families, they see sports as salvation. So a lot of times they ended up with bad situations because they see, sports salvation. So any sacrifice they made, it's like, oh, it's because I'm sacrificing right now to get the rewards later. Reggie Bush may thought of that. Hey, if I'm saving my family right now because my talents, allow me that. But he ended up getting, a lot of heat and a lot of, bad things with that. And here in Brazil, a lot of soccer players ended up as early as 12 or as early as 12, 13-year olds kind of signing with agents that give a lot of money, not a lot of money, but like 20 to 50,000 reais to have the economic rights for that player. And then they exploit that player and try to really promote him and try to make him the best athlete, and trying to even bribe coaches, bribe teams to make that player play so that he can be sold in the international market.
I just want to briefly shout out Bruno and Dusty for watching us. Thank you guys for watching us, and I hope you guys are enjoying the show. But yeah, I mean, from any kid that's from an unprivileged background, you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean, because you have a rare skill set that no one else has. Like, think about it, there's only 32 quarterbacks that can play in the NFL on any given week and on the planet Earth. Well, really, I guess more like 60, because every team has about 2 quarterbacks on a roster. Some might have 3. There's at tops like 70 guys who can be in the NFL right now as a quarterback, and it varies by position. And it's just there's not a lot of those people, and not everyone can wait until they're 20 to wait on that money. Like, if you need the money now, you're gonna find a way to get the money now.
Yeah,
And I
and
mean,
it's
I
a
just think about something like Bishop Sycamore. How those players were so desperate that they signed up with a school that didn't even exist because they thought that maybe this would provide their last chance. Because a lot of those kids had not graduated
and,
from high school; they
and this
couldn't
is
go back
kind
to
of
high school.
and this supports corruption because you're corrupting the youth of young athletes. You're corrupting their dreams, using their desperation to get to that dream, to advance, something like Bishop Sycamore. I guess they were trying to use the desperation to run a fake school or like a pretending school to play games so they'll be seen. But I guess they will be, given money by like, some boosters or even like
Yeah,
parents. But and when I saw, it was funny, like when I saw the Bishop Sycamore story, for me it was like, oh, it's not surprised. In Brazil, there's tons and tons of stories like that of teams, and now even especially after year 2000, even more because after the Pelé law, the teams does not hold the full rights of the player. The player can have like 50, 80, 60, 40% of the rights of their own, like, like
yeah. And could you
organization.
further explain that law? Because I think a lot of people probably never heard of that in terms of what
Yes.
soccer
The,
players couldn't
so
do before that.
before the law, the team owned the rights of the player. So it was kind of like MLB after free agents was created. I think compared to MLB, I think in MLB, before was, I think there was a player like this changed the rule that was like the team hold the right of
Mhm.
your, like, of
Yeah,
your
the
town.
NHL, I think a long time ago used to do that too. Like, I believe if you lived within 50 miles of a certain team, like if you lived in the Toronto suburbs and you were a good hockey player, you're going to play for the Maple Leafs. If
No,
Dylan's in here, he'll definitely would know that for sure. But I remember reading that before.
no, it was more like if you sign with your first team, this team will hold your right until this team sold you to another team, or the contract was expired and they released you. But now, after the Pelé law, the players own rights of their own, like of their own economic rights. So now it's like 50-50 or 60-40. So, and then open up a whole new industry for agents to get involved and to be a part of those percentage rights that Brazilian players now have under this new law, not new law, but under this Pelé law that was created in the late 90s. And it was funny that a lot of teams in, like, kind of like the middle Brazil, like the more, especially here in the state of Sao Paulo, kind of hate that law because after the law was created, a lot of those teams that rely on solely selling, developing players, selling players, getting the full amount of money from the transaction. Now they don't get the money anymore because the agents right now hold those rights. They have the rights of the players economically, and when the player gets sell to like a bigger team nationally, internationally, the team, the agents get the money, not the team. I know it's kind of a little
Mhm.
complicated, but I think it's because in the American sports, uh, it's like when you have a transaction, it's like team to team. There's not a third party. Like agents in America is more like they try to get the salary or like the how much money the player is gonna get paid. For example, and it's curious, like there's no monetary transactions between like say let's say NFL team like if, for example, tomorrow the Miami Dolphins want to like get Deshaun Watson, they can buy from the Texans or they can't.
I think there are cash considerations you can do, but it's very rare. Usually, you just give them a draft pick, and the Dolphins will have to give up a ton of draft picks, I think, to get
Because that's what I
Watson.
was thinking. That's what I was thinking recently too. Like in America, it's such a capitalist country, and it's such a market thing. But you don't see monetary transactions from team to team from players. Like you either the player is, as you say, traded because let's say Deshaun Watson traded from the Houston Texans to the Miami Dolphins, then the Dolphins give draft picks or another player, or they hit the free agency. So it's literally player to team. But there's no, and this, of course, I compare to like international soccer where there's like this huge, transactions with billions of dollars that happen also as well.
Yeah, it's just really interesting to think about the different systems and how they potentially cause or prevent corruption. When you look at European soccer, I feel like there is a ton of corruption. Like just look at what happened with Super League over the summer and how all the major clubs were trying to come together and basically destroy all of their national leagues, and just how that would have destroyed soccer in general. So, I mean, I think any form of sports are potentially um, bound to corruption. Even Little League, like remember that Jackie Robinson team from a couple years ago in Chicago, and how they had players that were older than the age limit, and that was a whole
Uh,
massive scandal.
and
And
in
it's
Brazil happened too. In Brazil happened too. Actually, with a player that is from my town here in Americana was the Sandro Hiroshi case because what happened was this guy literally faked his age to be lower than it actually is. So that way he caught up. The team that bought him from Rio Branco, the Sao Paulo team, they didn't know about it. So they, I guess, they weren't like punished. But a team that played against them and that was defeated went to court to get to like it went to like a Brazilian soccer Brazilian sports court to get the points back from that loss, and they got it. And then they ended up, not being relegated. And the team that ended up being relegated went to regular court asking, why am I getting relegated? Why am I being kind of like the end of the stick when this other case happened and not nobody did anything? And then there was a whole mess, but all started because a player also faked his age. I think also back in 2018 or 17, another player was caught faking his age to be lower than it actually is because again, it's such a ton of pressure to young athletes everywhere because you go from uh, 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 boom to bust in a really short time. Because I think the age that you make it or not is between 18 and 22.
right, and even earlier than that, like in America, like you're a football player. If you stink from the ages of 15 to 18, then where are you going to go play football in college? You have to go play at some low level school where you just have to pray that someone gets your tape. And that's not a fun feeling to do. And I know there's been many cases where some top tier recruits get discovered at the very last second, and they were very close to falling under the radar completely, even though they were a very capable athlete. But it's just there's a lot of craziness when it comes to sports. I mean, it's just anytime you have a lot of people that come together to run an organization, some of them are not going to have their best intentions. And I'm kind of surprised who didn't come up in this whole conversation is FIFA, and they're the kings of
Oh,
sports corruption. I mean that's a whole other separate episode on
yeah,
FIFA. And maybe we'll
because
get closer.
that goes beyond even our countries, because that goes to, like, European kind of, like, mass, because but of course involves Brazil and United States, and it was
Right.
funny, the United States was the country that was really heavily involved in investigating and punish the whole FIFA scandal.
Yeah, and it's gonna be just curious to see how our relationship goes into 2026, since we are going to be the main host of that World Cup. But unlike unlike what they were doing to Brazil or what they were doing to Qatar, it's gonna be really hard for them, I think, to bully the United States into changing any laws, just because the United States are one of the few countries that have more power than FIFA.
I think they don't have to, because I mean, as far as I know, America sells beer in the stadiums. The
Right.
stadiums are, done. They don't have to make any. I mean, it would be ludicrous to FIFA to change any, stadium. And going back to corruption again, why FIFA wants to go to, like, those countries, developing countries like South Africa, Brazil, Russia, Qatar, because of corruption. Because where is a lot of corruption involved? Construction, because you
Right.
need a lot of revenue, you need a lot of funding to build stadiums,
Yeah, and,
and
and they're basically getting away with paying those poor workers in Qatar nothing. I mean, most of these are like refugees from other countries in the Middle East, and like they're basically being paid nothing. And it's projected to be one of like the most grueling construction projects ever. I mean, there's a reason why this World Cup's going to take place in the middle of fall next year, which I'm very unhappy about because
me too. I hate that too, because in Brazil, November is would be kind of like, our December to January to NFL. It's like the almost the end of the season, so it's very weird, because and it'll be the first time ever that World Cup takes place after the presidential election. So Bolsonaro is very unhappy, because a mood of the country in Brazil really changes when when we win the World Cup, and the World Cup is going to happen after the election. So that even is crazy.
yeah, and also too, I'm very curious to see what the mood going into the World Cup's like, considering that we just had a Summer Olympics this year, and we're going to have a Winter Olympics coming up. A Winter Olympics that's going to be controversial because there's so much going on with China at the moment, and you have so many countries that are having issues with them at the moment. There's some people that are wanting to boycott that. I think that thing could get very interesting very quickly, and if anything goes on with the Winter Olympics, that could bleed over into the World Cup itself. So. And there's going to be a lot for us, I think, to talk about over the next couple of months as it relates to our two countries, just to everyone in general when it comes to some of these international sporting events, because I look forward to them. I look forward to the Olympics. I look forward to the World Cup. But I fear that some of the outside stuff that goes on in the other arenas of life and politics could unfortunately interrupt what we like to enjoy here is watch great sporting competitions.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because when there's a mess outside of the field, outside of the arena, affects what happens on the field. That's something that in Brazilian sports is very heavily known. And to finish up our topic, especially to sports corruption, and going back to our thank you, Leon Taryn.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
he is. Yeah, Leon, I do the instant review podcast with him. It's my other podcast that I do. It's NFL specific. So come check us out at Instant Review Pod. Uh, so we'll definitely be cross promoting a lot between our two podcasts. So thank you,
sounds
Leon, for taking the time to come talk with us.
Oh no, nice. No, I appreciate. But to finish up, so all that scandal into the NFL emails came because of the environment that Dan Snyder create into the Washington football team, and he kind of runs the Washington football team. I see as more like less like a professional kind of stuff, and more like a family-owned business. And in Brazil right now, in Brazil for, like, as far as I know, and goes beyond, for generations, soccer teams are also kind of like that, run as like a family owned organization. it goes like family to family, and there's elections with council and everything. But at the end, it's like from one family to another, from the same group to another. So eh, I just wondering if when you have kind of like this kind of like closed up organization where there's less run as a professional organization, is more like a family owned business, or like a like more like you mean what I get, like you get what you mean, like in
Right.
terms of like
Right. Definitely with corporate America, things are going to become less centralized, especially with some of the rumors that maybe Jeff Bezos is looking at buying Washington. There's just some rumors. There's not anything confirmed. But if that happens, then you've got perhaps the richest man in the entire world owning an NFL football team. And who knows what that does for the culture. But I mean, then again, I think of other tech execs such as Steve Ballmer with the Los Angeles Clippers, and I think he's done an amazing job for revitalizing that franchise because Donald Sterling was just an awful, awful owner. He might be the worst sports owner of all time. There's a lot of contenders for that, but I think Donald Sterling, considering that the team was awful when he ran the Clippers, and then obviously what he did at the end with all the racist rants that were caught on tape and stuff, it's just he was by far the worst. And Adam Silver did, I think, a great thing in booing him from the league and Ballmer. And I know the Clippers haven't won a title, but man, they've been a lot more competitive since he took over.
yeah. Yeah, and like of course, the giving Flamengo example right now is bad because they just lost at 3-0 into the Brazilian Cup. But Flamengo was kind of run very poorly up until 2013, 2014. They were in a lot of debt. They weren't paying players. There were a lot of corruption scandal, and then a new president took over, which are more like kind of corporate view, like let's pay our debt, let's kind of save money, let's rebuild, literally, have like cheaper players, let's save money so we can get the rewards in the future. That's what happening. Flamengo is the more like the biggest budget, the team which the best roster, the most richest roster, because they were able to rebuild after a very crazy economic situation. So that's what I mean. Like, and in Brazil even harder than America, because in America, like you mean to Sterling to Balmer, but in baseball you have two stars, and then you revitalize your organization. Like you can revitalize your sports team, like like basketball or even baseball. Like you have soccer is kind of complicated because you have to have an entire roster competitive to get the titles your fans really want it.
Absolutely. But like even in any sport, even with an addition of a star, you got to have the roster. In basketball, it might be the easiest just because, a couple of players can take you so far, but to win it all, you got to have a full roster. I mean, LeBron learned that the hard way. I mean, he was able to take Cavs to the finals basically by himself in 2007, but it took until 2012 until he was able to get a ring on his finger just because, you got to have the roster to do it. So and it's a good transition here because I kind of want to go into some of the Brazilian topics because you were talking about Flamengo. They lost 3-0 tonight, and I know for them that's a horrible, horrible loss. Just kind of explain
Oh,
what happened and
oh,
where do they go from here?
I was just watching. That's why I was not looking at the camera. I was looking at TV because I was literally watching the game. They are a mess right now. I wasn't expecting that because a month or two ago they were beating team after team of 4-0, 6-1, and with such ease, with such a like magical kind of thing, and now everything's falling apart. They just lost to one of the main rivals, Fluminense, which has a way lower budget team. It's not as good as Flamengo, 3-1. Now they got eliminated to the Brazilian Cup, which everybody was expecting them to make to the finals. So now the question is the roster as good as everybody expected, and their coach Renato Gaúcho to be as good as everybody expected? Because when he was hired, I was like, oh, he's our guy. He is going to take us to the promised land again. He was the right hire after Rogério Ceni was he got a Brazilian title, but he wasn't beloved there. He was seen as kind of uptight and very didn't have a good relationship with the players. Renato Gaúcho is more like a players friendly coach, and he has a lot of like the culture of Rio. but it doesn't seem to be working right now. They're really, one of the most like, they are very in a situation they're not playing well, and they have a South American Championship, the Libertadores final, like in a month, and everybody was thinking they were going to be favorites, and now I don't see them as favorites as before. Like,
Yeah. So do
I
you think it's
think,
more of a coaching or a roster problem right now?
I mean, I'll give a pass because some of their main players are out, like Dia Hascaeta. He's a really excellent midfielder. He's from Uruguay, and then he was called up to international duty to the World Cup qualifying game, and he got injured there. So Renato Gaúcho has a really important player unavailable to play. He got injured, not playing for his team, Flamengo, but for Uruguay. He is a nation. He's like, he is like a nation. So, but still, like, Flamengo has a really rich roster, and they just got 3-0 at home defeated to Atlético Paranaense, which is a good team, but it's a very one of those teams that has like a lot of young developing players that are really kind of like really playing hard, but it's not as talented as Flamengo. Like, that's the question. Like, ambiguous. It will actually ask a great question. Is it a roster kind of thing or a coach kind of thing? And I think in like a week or so is gonna be good to find out.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to revisit that because,
And
as you've said on numerous occasions, the Flamingo is one of the big teams in
it's
Brazil.
the Dallas Cowboys. It's the
Yeah,
Dallas Cowboys of
and
Brazil.
it definitely when it comes to soccer too, like those bigger clubs are going to always be able to get those bigger players. It's shocking to hear them lose games 3-0 because that's never a good score to lose in soccer. But I actually want to get back to a viewer question real quick. It's kind of an American question from Leon. Do you guys think the Lakers will win the finals this year? My answer, this might be a spicy take, but no, I do not think the Los Angeles Lakers will win the title this year, and here's why. Yes, they've got a lot of talent, but I just don't know when they get into the playoffs, one, their health. They're an aging roster. Like, all their stars at this point are virtually in their 30s. That worries me. Like, Anthony Davis, he's been very injury prone outside of the bubble. LeBron, even as great as he is, he's starting to get more and more injury prone throughout the years. Russell Westbrook, he's aging. Marlo Anthony, he's aging. There's only a handful of players there below 30. That's one of my main concerns when you're having to go night after night after night in the playoffs, because you can load manage throughout the season. I don't know how fresh they're going to be. And then I think with some of these younger teams, I think they're just more dynamic. I think they're better together. I don't know how truly Westbrook, Carmelo are going to play within this whole Lakers system when you get to the playoffs. I really do think that the Bucks or the Nets would be my two picks for the finals. In terms of who should come out of the West, I think it's wide open. If Klay Thompson can come back and be really healthy, I think the Warriors certainly have a shot because Curry, a healthy Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green have a lot more gelling together. The Suns, obviously they proved last year they could make a good run, although I don't know if they truly have the roster depth to make another run at it. The Nuggets, I mean, if Jokic can have a repeat of what he did last year, those are just a handful of teams. I don't really believe in Portland. I don't really believe in Dallas, but I think, and obviously the Clippers too. You can't forget about them either. If they can somehow remain healthy and make another run at it. Yeah, though the West is wide open, it's really difficult, and I really question how well they're going to work together in the long run. Because I know LeBron and AD won a title in the bubble, but it was the bubble. I think it was a different circumstance. I don't know if they win that title in a normal playoff, because you got to remember they were kind of injured and they were kind of rusty heading in to those playoffs when the coronavirus pandemic struck. And I think that 4-month break allowed them to get healthy, and they were in really good shape when they went into the bubble. So I think in a full season like this, I'm not completely sold. I could be completely wrong. I'm not the biggest NBA expert, but just from what I believe, I'm not a believer in the Lakers.
And you're gonna have an interesting hot take about the NBA coming up in
Absolutely.
the end of our show.
I kind of want to get back to the Brazilian topics real quick. Just
we have a comment here, and I'll translate it. He said, Edinho from here, Sao Paulo, is like, he said, that he was complimenting me like, good Tomazeli, Flamingo is not as good as everybody think. It like bum bum bum, be like the good good good. They're not good good good. A lot of people today are gonna be mocking Flamingo and be like, I thought, and be like asking, aren't you guys good? Like there was an even expression that a player called Bruno Henrique, he's a really good player. It's like another level, and now everybody's gonna mock him. Where is this another level team? The otro patamar. It's like everybody's gonna, make fun of, but that's sports, and that's our viewer, our listener
Yeah,
is
it reminds me a
talking.
lot of some of the Dodgers memes from last week. Like you spent $300 million to lose to an injury-plagued Braves team. So, and a lot of people
That's
are
gonna teach
accusing them
folks.
of winning a quote-unquote Mickey Mouse ring, which I'll go ahead and nip that in the bud. A championship ring is a championship ring, but the Dodgers, they still haven't won a ring in a normal postseason since 1988. So
But still, it's a title.
it is a title.
I don't like the devaluing of the Lakers and the Dodgers titles because it was in the pandemic situation. It was the NBA. It was the MLB. That should be considered. It's like here in Brazil, like oh, Flamengo won the Brazilian title because there were no fans and they went to play the next year. It's like it's still a title. It still counts. I don't think devaluing is just kind of like you devalue the title of the other team. It's like devaluing your own title because then you put the whole question into why are you playing then? Like if it was your team, you would be celebrating as well.
Oh, absolutely. A title's a title. I mean, none of my teams really won one. Like, if the Braves somehow win this series, I'll be celebrating like crazy just because I haven't really seen any of my teams really ever win a title. So that's something I'm really hoping happens. But is there anything else you want to finish up on the Brazilian side before we move over to the American side?
Uh, yeah. I mean, another update in the Brazilian Cup. Atlético Mineiro, the other rich team, defeated again Fortaleza 2-1 to advance to the final. So it's going to be Atlético Mineiro and Atlético Paranaense in the Brazilian Cup final. And speaking of Atlético Mineiro, they are 10 points ahead into the Brazilian Championship. They look like they're going to be the favorites. They're gonna be like really ahead, but I still question if their roster can maintain healthy because they're playing three different tournaments at the same time: Brazilian Cup, South American Championship, Brazilian Cup, and the Brazilian League. They were playing the South American Cup up until like a month ago, so they were playing three tournaments up until like not long ago.
So are they
So
playing like the same roster for all three of
they
those
play
tournaments, or are they...
they're playing the same roster. They
Wow,
playing the
that's
same
a lot of...
roster. They're playing the same roster, and Flamengo to that point as well. They're so like playing the same roster. They still have some games to catch up into the Brazilian league because they were able to like adjust the schedule because there were games postponed because there were some international. There were some players called for international duties, and they have to postpone the game. So it's like a whole kind of like, and also they're playing a full season. Brazilian soccer has not stopped for an off season up until the soccer came back after the pandemic stopped in July 2020. You know, they're still playing like really full. So imagine those players, Nick, with no off season.
Yeah, I mean that's insane because I know like in Europe with like the Shield Cup and FA Cup and stuff, often those the bigger teams will play will play their B or C squads in those games while they're resting the A squads for their normal uh league matches and like the Champions League. But I mean they're putting a lot of strain on those players, and maybe that is contributing to what's going on with Flamingo. But
Yeah, because mostly it's because those tournaments can lead to something like when you play the Brazilian Cup, you can get a spot into the South American Championship. Then Libertadores, of course, you want to win because you can get a spot into the FIFA World Cup tournament, and it's one of the most prestigious title any player can win. And of course, it's kind of hard to explain compared to the Americas, is because the Americas like all sports have one title. Like NBA, you won the NBA title. MLB, you won the MLB title. In soccer, like in Brazil, like in Europe, you have a lot of big to small tournaments that you can technically win. So I just want to give a big shout out as well to Cicero and Guilherme, they're listening as well here in Americana. They're enjoying it, and I appreciate the listening. So now back to the American topics as the World Series happening right now, right, Nick?
Yeah, so right now, unfortunately, tonight is not going well for my Atlanta Braves. So the Houston Astros lead in the bottom of the seventh inning, 7-2. Got a couple
Oh,
of runners on
disclaimer
base.
for for people listening on Spotify. We're recording this on October 27 at 11:47 Brazil time, 10:47 Eastern time.
Yeah, so that we're recording this during the later stages of this game. Unless the Braves somehow pull off a comeback here, it's probably going to head back to Atlanta 1-1, which I'm frankly all right with. That was what I was wanting from the Braves, to get at least one of these first two. They got last night 5-1, and what was a very, very good game. Or was it 6-2? It might have been 6-2. Whatever the score was, um, it was a very it was just a great start for the Braves, a dream start. In fact, the first time I've ever watched the Braves in the World Series, the last time they went there was 1999. Of course, Saturday night was our total roller coaster between watching the Vols lose to Alabama, then watching the Braves win the pennant for the first time in 22 years. Just it was an awesome feeling. And obviously, even though they won last night, they lost one of their aces in Charlie Morton, which really sucks because he's done a fantastic job. He had a 14-6 record this year, about a 3.6 ERA. And he was a backbone of this team. And, he was supposed to start, I believe, games 4 or 5 down the stretch. So I know they brought up Tucker Davidson to replace him, which he's playing in 4 games this year. So he's going to have a lot of pressure when he's get thrown into this. And you got to remember, we're already missing Mike Soroka, who's been injured since the middle of last season. So, the Braves are really short-handed. We don't have Ronald Acuna. Marcell Ozuna's been out the entire year due to off-the-field issues. But these Braves are resilient, and I think this upcoming 3-game stretch here in Atlanta is going to be very, very interesting. I think if they want to win this series, they got to find a way to win 2 out of 3, because you got to go to Houston with 2 chances to win it all. I think if you go down to Houston, you're not winning 2 straight to win it all. So that's just my opinion.
Fun fact, Nick. When was the last game in a World Series that the Houston Astros won?
It was against the Dodgers, I believe, right?
Yeah, in 28. Not because 2017, because in 2019, as you remember, they lost all games at home at Minute Maid Park. So I'm glad you're caught up. Like
right. And a series that let's just say Dodgers fans haven't gotten over. Like, if you look at the Astros mentions, Dodgers fans are so mad over that. And granted, I would be too, but it's like, bro, like, get over it. Like, you've had several other chances. You had this year, to get back at them, and you weren't able to get over a shorthanded 88 win Atlanta Braves team. So, that's on you. That's on you at a certain point. You couldn't even win your division. So, Dodgers fans, you'll get over it. You have your ring from the pandemic season. Football talk. So I'm gonna be honest, this football weekend wasn't that exciting between college football or NFL. Here in Tennessee at Vols, Tennessee Alabama game was actually quite interesting. It was a tight game headed to the fourth quarter. The Vols actually had a lead after the first quarter. Everyone was losing their mind with that lead, because for those of you who don't follow Tennessee Alabama religiously, this is one of the most historic rivalries in all college football. It's called the third Saturday in October. It matters a lot to us. Matters a whole heck of a lot to us here down in the South. But Alabama has won every single game since 2007. The last time the Vols won, I was 8 years old. 2006, I remember watching that game. It's the only time I've ever seen Tennessee beat Alabama. So while Alabama has been dominant, they've won, I believe, 6 national titles under Nick Saban. Tennessee's been kind of down in the dumps. But with Josh Heupel, our new coach, Tennessee was actually competitive. And we're shorthanded. We've got injuries. We had a lot of transfers off in the offseason. But I'm so proud of this team. They hung in there with them. They were only down a touchdown in the fourth quarter. But Alabama's staff was just too much, and their talent was too much. But I think if Josh Heupel can get his guys in here, really build up this roster in a couple of years, I really think this rivalry is going to be back to where it was, meaning a whole lot to who wins the SEC. And just, for the first time in years, it felt like a rivalry. And also to the Tennessee Titans, they absolutely blew out Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs 27-3. And it was just an absolute down performance. The Titans defense played their best game that they've played in years. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal to watch them get after Mahomes, shutting down that aerial attack, prevent him from even getting to the end zone. And I think what's apparent right now is Mahomes has no help. He has no offensive line, no running game. And despite how great he is, in football, you just can't do it all by yourself. So, and not to mention their defense is just absolutely atrocious. Like Ryan Tannehill was just slicing them up like cheese. So, the Kansas City Chiefs, I don't even know if they're a playoff team at this point. They're 3-4. Probably the craziest thing that happened in football this weekend. Penn State, Illinois. I don't know how many of you watched this game. It was a noon game. The final score is 2018 Illinois pulling off the upset under first-year head coach Brett Bielema versus a probably distracted Penn State team. James Franklin has been rumored to potentially go to Southern California or LSU. I think it's very likely it's going to take one of those two jobs because he's been talking a whole heck of a lot about it, trying to say, "Oh, I'm focused on Penn State," but no, I'm pretty sure he's looking to leave Pennsylvania for greener pastures. But for the reason why I want to talk about this game, this was a 9 overtime game that basically with new overtime rules, when you reach the third overtime, and what happened in the past was you would still get the ball to the 25-yard line, but if you scored a touchdown, you would have to go for two. But now they've taken that out, and literally at the third overtime, it's just 2-point conversions. And these offenses were so bad that I believe they went 3 of 12 in overtime, getting 2-point conversions combined. Like, it was just some of the worst execution I've ever seen from an offense. And really, Penn State doesn't even deserve to be ranked. I believe they're 20th in the AP poll right now. They just should have fallen out completely. That was awful, and they deserve to lose that game.
I think Penn State was only kept in the rankings because of their matchup this weekend. I believe is Ohio State,
which they'll lose by at least 3 to 4 touchdowns because they're just a terrible team.
But they want to keep it because of the kind of TV kind of promo. You don't want to change your promo and be like, Ohio State is playing a ranked team. They want to prop up that game, and even they were like probably upset and not happy that Penn State lost to Illinois, they still want to keep the ranked versus ranked team on a prime time game on national television.
Yeah, but I just want to say, like, the fact now that this is a way that we could determine a college football game is asinine. It reminds me of like a shootout in soccer or hockey. Just think about all the work you have to do in those sports to get a goal, and then it comes down to kind of a luck of the draw of a shootout. That's what this is like. And I don't think that college football, especially with how much individual results mean, because 1 or 2 losses can completely remove you from the playoff conversation, can remove you from winning a title. Because like in hockey, you play 82 games. In soccer, you play up to like 40 games.
Here in the league is like 38 in Brazilian.
Yeah, and even then, most of the time they don't even have overtime except for tournaments. But for college football, these games matter way too much to determine it in such an asinine way. I think, honestly, NFL at this point has the better form of overtime because, at the very least, if you're a defense, you've got the whole field to stop them and at least prevent them from scoring a touchdown. The only thing is, I don't like the fact that overtimes are only 10 minutes now instead of what they were in 15, and the fact that that ties are still a possibility. But this is just a totally stupid way of determining a game. At some point, you're going to see some upset that should have never happened. Well, really, it's Saturday. Was an upset that probably shouldn't have happened. But then again, Illinois ran for over 300 yards in this game. So yeah, Penn State probably deserves to lose this game. But that's my rant on that. The last thing I really want to get into before we get into hot takes, a motorsports topic. Because this past weekend in Austin, Texas, at the Circuit of the Americas, was the return of the United States Grand Prix. And I don't know if you saw the crowd shots from Texas, but they had over 400,000 people come for the turnstiles this weekend, including 150,000 for the race itself on Sunday. And that crowd was electric. It looked like a whole lot of fun down there. I know they got over 100,000 there for the NASCAR race back in May. But what's crazy is that race was happening the same time as a NASCAR race up in Kansas, up outside of Kansas City. And that race only got about 50,000 people to show up. Now, what's ironic is in America, The NASCAR race actually got about 2.5 million people to watch it, while the F1 got about, I think, 1 million. So NASCAR is still outdrawing on television, at least in America. But there is a caveat to that. The 18 through 49 demographic, which is the most valuable to TV broadcasters, more people were watching F1 than NASCAR. And I think that should really be sounding alarm bells to the people who run NASCAR, because the average age of a NASCAR fan is, I believe, 58. And while I've seen more and more young people get into NASCAR, at least online, it's not, I think, translating as much as F1 is, because F1 has the Netflix show Drive to Survive, and it's just
And also, they have global personalities like Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton is a global personality.
Yeah, Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo, like these dudes are very interesting to watch, and the racing is just a lot more, I think, seriously taken. And part of the problem is, I think, I heard someone else, like this guy I watch on YouTube, Eric Estep, he does a lot of NASCAR news. He calls it the Ricky Bobby effect. And what he means by that is that, ever since the release of Ricky Bobby, Battle of Talladega Nights, a lot of people see NASCAR as this sport where dumb rednecks turn left for 4 hours. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot that goes into the sport. It's a tough sport. A lot of people have died during the sport. A lot of people get hurt doing the sport. It's an intense sport. But I don't think the sport gets the respect it deserves, because NASCAR itself doesn't take itself seriously enough. And I think that's turning off young fans, because they want to watch something intense. They want to get into the action. They want to be able to respect the drivers. And F1's actually doing that. F1 is communicating just how serious it is. The announcers aren't just being silly in the booth when they're talking about the races, but in NASCAR they are. So I think NASCAR, if they want to maintain their hold on the NASCAR, on the American market, they have to take themselves more seriously, because it's an intense sport, and they should talk about it as such.
And also a good point, like, I think Formula One is just one successful American driver away to even, take even more fans from NASCAR. Because right now, you see the F1 growth, but you don't still have like an American driver that would kind of embrace, like say, compare here in Brazil. Like here, Formula One was big in the 80s and 90s because of personalities such as Ayrton Senna, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Rubens Barrichello, especially Senna and Fittipaldi. They were world champions. They had a rivalry. They were successful. So people, cheer in Formula One because of they can cheer for drivers. So I believe that if there is an American driver that can be that ended up being successful in the F1, then NASCAR is like not done, but it's going to even lose even way more market share in terms of auto sport competition. And our viewer Guilherme Nascimento is asking you what is the NASCAR situation right now. He's asking about if NASCAR is on the playoffs. So we have a Brazilian viewer interested in NASCAR.
Yeah, so they are in the playoffs. They have 2 races left. They race this weekend at Martinsville, a short track, and next week they go to Phoenix, which is also a short track, but a little bit different. The only driver that's locked themselves into the championship 4 race is Kyle Larson. He's won 9 races this year. Of course, you might remember that he got into a massive controversy last year where he dropped a racial slur while he was on a sim racing, but he worked to get himself back into the sport. And this year, he's just been absolutely dominant, better than he ever really was before. So he's just been an absolute terror. He won a lot of big dirt races too, won the Knoxville Nationals if you're into dirt racing. So he's going to be in the championship. There's a lot of other drivers who are going to be fine for those other free spots. I think you're going to see Denny Hamlin. You might see Chase Elliott. I think those 2 will definitely be in for sure. In turn 4 spot, I'm not sure. I feel like a Martin Truex Jr. could get in there. Kyle Busch has a shot. Of course, you'll have Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, and Ryan Blaney. The other 3, he'll be fighting for that. But that's just my personal thoughts. And I really hope Larson or Hamlin wins, because they are the 2 most deserving winners. And this is, I think, one of the other big problems in NASCAR right now too, is the championship format it's stupid. Like NASCAR should be rewarding consistency and rewarding who is the best driver for 36 races. And right now, if you take a look at what the old school standings would be like, Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin would be apart by 9 points in the old Winston Cup point standings from back in the 90s and before. And that's when you had to be good for an entire season. Like right now, you could win
Kind of
one
like
race.
Formula One is. Kind of like what
Yeah,
Formula
like
One is.
Formula One. I think that's part of the thing too, because in Formula One right now, you have an awesome points battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Verstappen leads that battle by, I believe, 12 points. And it's just interesting because, those two have to show up every single race because one bad race could lose you the championship. That's just not the case in NASCAR right now. Because right now, Larson could go out and run last place in Martinsville, and it doesn't matter because he's going to be racing for a championship next week. So,
I think like NASCAR not paralyzed into be like, hey, we are an American sports league. We need to have playoffs like all the other leagues. Like, not necessarily. Like, if motor racing,
IndyCar doesn't. Like IndyCar is an American racing league, and they don't do that.
yeah, that's true. Like IndyCar, it's because IndyCar is not paralyzed to be a whole American, sports league. IndyCar has a lot of international influence. Like you have, a lot of international drivers, even I believe some even international teams. So they bring this kind of like mentality that has a lot of F1. NASCAR is so close up into be this whole American, motor sports league that they don't embrace good ideas from internationally.
Yeah, and that's actually my prediction. If there is going to be any American driver that's going to go into F1, I think it's going to be an IndyCar driver because they're open wheel. I think in particular, I'd watch Colton Herta. He's very, very young. I think he's in his early 20s. He's won a couple of races. He's been very competitive. He was in the competition for the Indy 500 this year, and he does really good on the road courses. And I believe one of the Andretti's is actually looking to get into F1 potentially. So I really do think that if an American were to go into F1, it might be him. Maybe not anytime soon, but you're completely right. If you can get an American into F1, that's where it could absolutely skyrocket because ESPN, just allowing Sky Sports to do their thing on the coverage, is phenomenal. And also, one of their big things, too, it's awesome to get to watch a full race without commercials. In NASCAR, the commercials are ridiculous, and they got to find a way to balance it because I understand you got to pay the bills. But like in football, the game stops. You never miss a play. Like in baseball, you never miss a play. But in NASCAR, you're actively missing parts of the race because of commercials. So in F1, they don't do that. Like even with their Indianapolis 500 this year, they showed the entire race at least on a side screen while showing commercials. So you never actually missed any part of the race.
And like it's a good point brought to our listener Guilherme. Like in sports we need rivalry, like players rivalry, like Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, or team rivalry between Real and Barca. Like, and as a point out that I made, even I remember doing a Rockstar Sports, like NASCAR does not have a full rivalry. Does not like have people that will tune in to watch, a battle that will be like, let's say in the NFL have the Super Bowl, of course, but like.
And honestly, it used to be like that though, because used to have Dale Earnhardt, who's one of the most popular drivers ever, versus Jeff Gordon back in the 90s, because there were two very different drivers, representing very different things within the NASCAR fan base. But you just don't have that now. I think that's a big thing. Like in F1, you got Hamilton versus Verstappen. I think that is driving a lot of the interest right now. So in NASCAR, they really need to find a way to get a rivalry going that would turn a lot of eyes. And I think, honestly, one of the ones that could happen, Larson versus Elliot, even though they're teammates, because I think Elliot was used because he had won the championship last year. Like, Jimmy Johnson had just retired. He's thinking, okay, Hendrick Motorsports is mine. Like, I am the head honcho here. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon back in the day, because Gordon was the head honcho at Hendrick. He was winning all these championships. Then Johnson shows up and he starts winning all these championships. There's now a debate of who's the better driver at Hendrick. And now Larson has showed up this year and has won 9 races. So that's going to be interesting to see between Elliot and Larson, because Elliot has finished second to Larson this year 4 times. And you can just tell in his face every time he does it, it pains him because he wants to be the best driver at his respective sport. So that's when I think that NASCAR needs to start pushing Chase Elliott versus Kyle Larson.
It's not ludicrous to think of a rivalry that of drivers in the same team. Like in the F1 was really common. Like it goes for one of the biggest rivalries I think in F1 history. It was Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. They both raced for Mercedes, and they had epic battles, and they raced for the same team. But they were such a good drivers, they were able to compete and drive ratings up and drive interest up because there was a heated rivalry. recent. I think the most recent one was, I believe was in Renault was Fernando Alonso. It was Mercedes. We have Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Like because of a rivalry, it was just two good drivers had such a momentum. So I don't think I think that NASCAR could push that. I don't, and if the team itself could be used as to promote their brand, it should be like we have the two most talked and the two most heated drivers in NASCAR.
Right, and also it'll be interesting to see if we see another Mercedes rivalry with George Russell coming in next year, see if he can challenge Lewis Hamilton better than Valtteri Bottas. Bottas is dead, but there's gonna be a lot to watch with that, and it's gonna be a story to watch over the next couple of years to see if F1 can continue to grow. But I think also too for NASCAR, they need some of their younger stars to really make an impact. Like Bubba Wallace, he's finally won a race, so I'm interested to see if he can parlay that into some more success to really like be that first African American driver to really make a splash. I think Daniel Suarez for Trackhouse, he's had some really good runs this year, really established himself as a Hispanic driver. And then also some of the young women that are coming up, like a Haley Deegan, for example. She's driving in Trush this year. I believe she's had 2 top 10s so far. She's ran fairly decent, but she still has a long way to grow. If we can get a woman to really run well in NASCAR, I think that would just open up possibilities for new audiences. Because I know we had Danica Patrick, but she didn't do so well. So we need some successful drivers that really can appeal to different audiences outside of what has been the traditional NASCAR audiences, and that could also bring back some of the younger audiences as well. But I think at this time I would like to move on to hot takes, begin to wrap up this show. So Gus, I'm going to let you go first of yours.
Sounds good. My hot take would be, and of course, would be even more amplified with tonight's result of Flamengo. Like impatience with the soccer coaches of Flamengo and Palmeiras, like Abel Ferreira from Palmeiras and Flamengo of Renato Gaúcho. I think that's really exaggerated. Those two teams are the most successful teams in the last 4 years. They are, of course, their fans are always expecting to be on the top in all competitions. And of course, not always going to happen that. Flamengo's just eliminated into the Brazilian Cup. Palmeiras was, the first place in the Brazilian League, and now they fall even to 4th place. Now they're back in the 2nd place, but like they're 10 points behind, and they're not playing well. And then the fans turn to blame the coaches. But I think those two coaches are proven to be successful. Like Renato Gaúcho, he won the many successful titles in Grêmio, another soccer team, and I think he was able to prove that he can coach this team. Of course, Flamengo is dealing with a lot of injuries, and now they're eliminated from one cup, and in the Brazilian league, they're kind of like a little bit further from the 1st place, but they're seeing the Libertadores final. And Palmeiras fans there a week ago were like chanting, F you, Abel, we hate you, because the team wasn't playing to the standards. Now they're back in love with their coach because of their recent result, 3 straight wins, and the teams are more like playing with more determination. But I think I know with more expectation comes more pressure, but still I think that's exaggerated. And they're both teams are gonna play in the Libertadores, the South American final in late November. I think that's a good defining moment of both coaches to see who is really successful and who is not going to make it. And that's my hot take. And I'll give back to Nick in the US.
Yeah, it's never good when you're getting cursed out by your own fans. Certainly you got to fix that situation really quickly. My hot take is the NBA should not be starting their season until Christmas. There's so much going on right now between World Series, between football going on, that I think the NBA gets lost in the noise, really, the first 2 months of the season. And by the time we get to Christmas, there's so much of the season that's already passed. And I think it works better because if you start at Christmas, then your playoffs are all summer. And I really honestly loved watching the finals in late July. It just made way more sense to me. There's a lot less of a gap between the end of the finals and the return of football. And if you move back the start of the NBA to December, then there is just that loss. Then you just don't have to compete with football that much. Because by the time the Super Bowl ends, you still have like 3 or 4 months regular season to go. So I think if the NBA really wants to drive up their regular season ratings, you don't want to compete with football. I know they're doing somewhat better, well, at least with some matchups, like the Warrior Lakers draw a pretty good rating, but I would not compete with football as much as I possibly could. The NBA needs to seriously consider going back to starting at Christmas like they did last year. It feels like a nice natural place to start the season. It felt natural to watch the first couple of games of last season on Christmas Day, and by the time the season really ramps up, everything else is done. So it's like, okay, now it's time to really get into NBA, because I'm more of a playoff guy anyway, just because there is so many NBA games. I think there's an argument to be made that the season is too long. I mean, I'm not sure how long, what the right length should be. I feel like somewhere around 60, 70 games is perfect. But at the end of the day, if you're still going to do 82, I think doing a December to August season makes a whole lot more sense than doing an October to June.
And that's hot takes here on Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports, episode 2. Here in Brazil is already October 28th. In America, I believe it's still October 27th. That's the day and time that we record our show.
Yeah,
and
2 different days too. So 2 Americas, 2 countries, 2 Americas, 2 days, all sports. But that is the conclusion of the show. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Thank you to everyone who came on and commented on our live shows. We're gonna get back to doing on Tuesdays. If you want to join us live, we'll be on YouTube, we'll be on Facebook and Twitter, 10 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Brazilian Standard Time. We'll do that every single Tuesday. Obviously, if we have to change it, we'll let.
I just want to explain why we had to do today on Wednesdays, because yesterday we had a playoff game here in the state tournament that went up into the last minute, and it was a very cruel elimination. It was a very heartbreaking elimination. I covered it, and that's why I was covering a game between 15 of Piracicaba and São Caetano. Just explain to our audience why we're doing on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. And thank you, Guilherme, here from Americana, to listen live. And that's it for Gus Tomazeli and
for Nicholas Silso, for Gus in Americana, Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'm Nicholas Hill in Chattanooga, Tennessee of the United States. Thank you for listening to Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. We'll catch you next time. Take care.